Here we go. So we're going to be talking about building your business today, and in particular, the black art of raising capital, getting investors on board your company. Capital raising is probably the single most important and most stressful hurdle to establishing a successful business. Sometimes it is all those things. Yeah, I would agree with that. For all parties concerned, actually investors as well as the company. But first off, I want to kick off with a story. We've got quite a few inventors in the room, so that's great. So I've gone through the Rolodex in my head of companies that we've invested in, 50 of them now, and I pulled out one that I think you'll enjoy the story of. So this story starts with an inventor who wasn't really an inventor. He's a hairdresser. And he was getting sick and tired of working with women coming in who have damaged hair, because the fashion, I guess, the last 10 years, the fashion has been for women to straighten their hair using these tongs, GHD devices, and hot tongs, and straightening their hair. And that fries their hair and really damages it. So David was constantly trying to address this problem of damaged hair. And David knew many things about hair. One of them, which is that if you cool the hair down, then the hair follicles of the hair tend to settle down nicely on the hair, and it makes the hair look shinier and smoother and not so frizzy, as it can look. So he started using bags of ice on women's hair in his hair salon, which didn't go down all that well, because you can imagine that wasn't all that comfortable. So he started to think, well, I wonder if it's possible to develop a device that looks a lot like a hot tong, but actually does the opposite thing, which is delivers really cold temperatures to the hair, because that's a much, much healthier thing to do for the hair. So he fired off $20,000 or so of his own money, got some product development guys working on it, and came up with something that looked like it might possibly work at some point. That was around about the time that we got involved. David is, our office is located in Tauranga. David's in Tauranga. So he approached us for investment. Gosh, it was really early, a bit too early for us. So we got a mentor involved to help him, and started working with him. Long story short, from that point, we've now raised a couple $1 million, probably, a couple $1 million for him. We've had a board around David now for 3 years. That device now has gone through many changes. The business model has gone through many changes, but it's now distributed through many countries throughout the world, and we're hoping it's going to be a really big success for all of us as investors, for David, and also for the country. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of heart that it doesn't matter who you are, where your invention is coming from, it is possible that you can attract investment capital and build a business out of it. The key thing is the people and the money. So a little bit about Enterprise Angels. 200 plus angel investors. Great news for any of you that are considering raising capital, because 10 years ago when I got started in this game, call Bill Gallagher. I mean, it was hopeless. There was no system. Just call the local rich guy and hope he's going to invest in you. And everyone was calling Bill Gallagher, and so it just didn't work at all. So now we have 200 investors. These are all experienced business people, experienced investors, wealthy people, that's a relative term, but relatively wealthy people, who have to date invested $18.5 million in 50 companies. Across New Zealand, $50 million a year gets invested into early stage and startup companies by angel investors. So if you're coming up with an idea, much better idea to come up with it now than 10 years ago, much easier to raise capital. I mentioned before about money. It's not just about the money, it's also about the smarts you get on board. David Rowe knew hair. He didn't know business. He didn't know raising capital. He didn't know how to turn this thing into a business. He didn't know about how to turn this thing into a product. We put all those skills around them. Some of these guys here represent that tonight. Both their companies are involved in that company. So it's about bringing the skills in around as well as the money that really makes the difference. We take a best practice approach. If we were to invest in you, we would take you through a screening process. We would take you through due diligence. In other words, we would look at everything about what you're doing, your company, your invention, intellectual property, all those things. And on the basis of that, we would then invest. We have a board, as I said, members, corporate members, and we're a not-for-profit incorporated society. So our job in life is not to is not to make zillions of dollars out of the companies we invest in. Our job is to make all this work and get investment opportunities for our investors. So equity investment, that's just one way of bringing fuel into your company. In other words, cash into your company. There's obviously other ways. The bank, there's lots of other ways. But what's the advantages of equity investment? Well, there's no interest. If you borrow money from the bank, you're paying interest. And in an early stage company, cash is king or queen. And if you're having to pay out cash every month to the bank for interest, it's just sort of hampering you. So you either fund it yourself or you can fund it through investors and you don't have to pay interest. What you really want, if you're going to be getting investors on board, is you want them to bringing their smarts, their Rolodex, their connections, their background, their experience, as well as the money. That's what you want to be looking for and insisting upon. You may think, and some entrepreneurs and inventors do think this, that they know everything and therefore they don't want to have any influence by other people in their business, and that's fine. If they do know everything, great, they can go and do it. But we only work with people who recognize that nobody's the full 360 in terms of the skill set, and that everybody needs help with at least half of that 360, and we bring smarts as well as dollars to the deal. Investor protective terms, it's interesting that I put that there. That could actually be a mistake. Under cons, what are some of the downsides potentially of bringing investors on board? Well, depends on how you look at it, but you are selling a part of your business. That's what you're doing. We're buying a part of your business with the investment that we make. And it is about shared decision making. We will have people who will be able to bring a lot of expertise to the company, and therefore we're sitting around the board table with you making decisions. Investor protective terms, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. That could be viewed as a positive or a negative, depending upon your point of view. So generally, 15, 20, 30, 40% maximum. Is this the next slide? Yes, it is. So just talking a little bit about the stages of raising capital. Seed stage, in my definition of it, that means you're still working on a technical problem. You're still building your product. Early stage, startup, that's the sweet spot for angel investors because most angel investors are business people. So if you come to us when you're still dealing with technical issues, someone like me is going to look at it and go, I don't really understand the risks of this because I'm not a technical person and I don't really understand what he's grappling with here. So I'm going to assess the risks of this as very, very high, and therefore when I reach for my back pocket to pull up my wallet and invest, usually my hand comes out and there's no wallet in it because I go, yeah, that's just a bit too risky. So if however you bring an opportunity to us and you've sorted out the technical issues, you got a product ready for market, then we go, oh great, because we're business people. And we say, oh, you're asking us, how do I turn this into a business? We go, okay, great, we know how to do that. So that's the sweet spot, that startup and early expansion stage for angel investors. Later stage, private equity and venture capital come in. That's when you're looking to expand into further markets offshore and you're needing to raise $3, $4, $5, $10 million. But there's capital available at all stages. Just a bit of a warning, between early expansion and expansion, that's called the Valley of Death, and there's not a lot of capital available for companies at that stage. So that's a challenge right around the world. So who are investors? Angel investors, they're experienced, wealthy people. There's a lot of places for them to be putting their money. They put their money in this place because they enjoy it, it's stimulating, but they also want to make a difference. Believe it or not, these investors are not there to fleece you, take your company. They're actually there to make a difference regionally, here in the Waikato, Bay of Plenty, and nationally. It's one of the ways in which they give back because they recognize the risks of this investing are very, very high, and in some instances, they're not going to get their money back. We're investors, investor directors, and advisors to your company. What are we looking for? Innovative opportunities that have got a sustainable competitive advantage. And by that, what I mean is we can bring your fantastic thing that you've got into market and we can hold on to it and grow it long enough to get it acquired. Because because that's generally speaking, trade sale is generally the way in which we and you will get your money out of it. So that's what we're looking for. We're investing as an individual. You might think, okay, well, how much do these guys invest? Well, as individuals, we'll invest $10,000 to $25,000 in each opportunity. You might think, well, that's not very much money. Well, we know that we have to be investing in at least 10 of your type of companies, because statistics show us that we may lose our money in up to half of those. Valuation, we'll have conversations about valuation, and I'm happy to give you a sense for what your value might be at any point. But we don't get totally hung up on value. There's other important things. Here's this slide about what happens to our investing, and really simply put, what these big columns here mean is that if we invested in 10 companies, we'd lose all or most of our money in half of them. So that's what the world looks like to us. That's our experience. So you guys have to know when you're talking to us, that's what we know. Now we're backing your company all the way because we're going to invest in it. But we also know, it may end up being one of these companies. We're hoping for 2 or 3 of the companies to return us up to 5 times our money, and we're hoping for 1 or 2 of them to be a real screaming winner, 10 times or more of the money that we invested in the company. And that's what makes the whole thing work for us, so that we can continue to invest in the space. And silly thing, what do angel investors do as soon as they get a return off one company? They go and invest it again in another startup. They're crazy. Typical investor terms. And I do have due diligence worksheets, which I left in the car, and I'll bring in maybe at the end. Typical investor terms, milestoning. You may come to us and you say, this thing is worth $4 million every day, all day. We might say, that's just dandy, great. Actually, we're not so sure that that's the case. And so you said in your business plan that you're going to take the product into these markets by this date, and you're going to have revenues of this by this date. So let's agree to this. We'll say, okay, the value is as you say it, but if you don't meet that target, and you don't meet that target, then the value is going to be this. So that's one of the ways in which we can negotiate around value. Owner vesting, if you're the critically important person in the business at that stage and for the next couple of years, we want you to stay in that business. And if you decide, you'd rather go off and do something else, as inventors can sometimes do, well then we're going to own a whole bunch more of the company because you're the critical person and we need you in there to run the company. Liquidity preference. If the company has a liquidity event, so in other words, there's a merger or an acquisition or there's a sale of the company, then we as preference shareholders would get paid the amount that we invested in the company first ahead of all other shareholders. So it's just a way of protecting our investment. Anti-dilution, if for some reason the company's value goes down and we raise capital on the basis of that, then we get an adjustment to our shares so that we don't suffer that devaluation of the company. And investor director, where we have a high enough investment in the company, enough dollars, a high enough percentage, then we look to take a board seat. And so we have some specific approvals and veto rights that we have as an investor director. The due diligence checklist, which I'm going to bring in at the end so that you guys can have a look at it, just walks you through what are the areas of your company that we look at when we take you into due diligence, just in order to give you a bit of a heads up so you can start preparing documentation and stuff like that. Okay, that wraps me up.